Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch, and if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 24 of Breaking Step. Tibs observed the crowd from next to the food table, sensing the essence among them. Two of the attendees had an element. A woman in a red silken shirt and pants had earth, while a somber man had an element Tibbs didn't know. The tint was almost like metal, but he could tell it wasn't, as if it had a sheen to it he couldn't quite perceive. Both were below epsilon, in spite of looking at the others as if they were superior to anyone here. Everyone at epsilon or above here at epsilon or above worked for the guild. The guards against the walls against the wall were the servers walking among the attendees with trays, offering food and drinks for those who were beneath, walking the long table with all the food, with all the foods. With all the food. Okay, this doesn't work. The guards against the wall, the servers. Because if nothing else, there should be a third category. If not, it's end. Everyone at Epsilon Bomb work for the guild. The guards against the wall, and the servers walking uh, among the attendees with trays. They offered. They offered food and drinks for those who were beneath. The servers. Nah. Who were beneath, walking to the long table with all the foods. Tibbs had eaten some. They were okay. The drinks were too strong for his liking. There didn't seem to be one tankard anywhere or ale. These people Tirania had gathered because she considered. These people Tirania had gathered because. Tirania had gathered these people because she considered them important and powerful. Was another reminder. Serena had gathered these people before she considered them important and powerful. It was another reminder to Tibbs that power didn't always work the way he thought it did. Too few of them had an element for that to make them powerful, and while he didn't know how many coins these people had, he'd been in enough nobles' house to know not all of them had as many coins as they acted like they did. Some of the merchants on the row had more than a few in the nobles' quarters, even if they still somehow had less power. As living when living on his street, Tibbs had thought power meant physical strength. He hadn't had that, so cunning had been his strength, but it hadn't given him power. He'd known coins were a form of power because the nobles spent some on guards, the way those with enough silver slivers paid thugs to enforce their will. Once he found out about elements and what essence did, he decided that was power, that it was how the guild could do everything it did, that the guild got away with what the guild got away with certainly supported that belief. But Sebastian had showed Tibbs coins could bring more than physical strength. He had used his to get people to act to his advantage without ever using thugs. Coins could change people's minds as if by magic. The nobles of Craggle Rock had showed Tibbs status was also power in and of itself. Quite a few got their way purely with that, as they didn't have the coins they acted like they did. All of it was strange, but he had to learn to see it so he could work out how to make use of it. Tibbs sensed the man with metal as his element approach before he became visible, and he tried to work out what was different in his essence that let Stone know Iridian was suffusing himself. He could sense how dense it was, above gamma, but there were no details there. The essence was just throughout all his channels. He tried to remember if Don's essence had felt different once he'd suffused himself, but other than sensing it happen, Tibbs had been more interested in the interactions between him and the representative. Iridian came to a stop before Tibbs and studied him. Tibbs returned to look. Don't think any of this is about you, Iridian stated, then took a goblet of water from the table. While there weren't many of them, no one else seems interested. No one. I don't need a while. Because if I have a while, I need a den or something like that. There weren't many of them. No one seemed interested in drinking water, and like every other goblet, they had a weave through them composed mainly of water essence that kept the liquid cold. You're just our pawn. Why does that matter to you? Just reminding you of your place. He sipped his goblet. I don't want you to think you're more powerful than you are and reach so high your fall's going to pull down your friends with you. Don't threaten my friends, Tibbs said casually. Sebastian did. I don't make threats, the commander replied just as casually. Tibbs filled a crack in the ice. Isn't it dangerous having all those people in here? He might as well see what useful information he could get from the man. All in all in this one room in the building? What if one of their enemies finds out and gets an assassin among their retinue? Tibbs could tell quite a few people in attendance deferred to the same person. Iridian raised an eyebrow, watching him, then shrugged. If they can't ensure the people with them are loyal, that's their problem, not mine. What if an assassin sneaks through the building and into this room to make the kill? The smile was small. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see one of them try. You don't think they could? Even without an element, thieves are resourceful. Your kind isn't smart enough to get through the defenses. My kind, Tibbs emphasized the word, isn't interested in trying. Thieves and assassins would be. Any lock can be cracked, any trigger jammed. All it takes is time and experience. That's one thing the runs have taught me. Iridian rolled his eyes. The dungeon's not teaching you anything about the world. All it's doing is making you stronger so we can send you against the same kind of creatures when they forget their place. If you can't remember that, if you think you're different from any of the other runners and can get away with things you can't, you're going to end up crushed. The guild's teaching me how to deal with the world. Iridian snorted. Tibbs phased the man. For someone working for the guild, you don't seem to care for it all that much. I'm a guard. Doesn't mean I have to make believe what I'm guarding is any better than they are. Then why are you trying to stop me if you don't think the guild does a good job? Iridian faced Tibbs and locked eyes with him. Because rules are what keeps the world from descending into chaos, he said heatedly. I'm well aware the guild doesn't follow its own rules, but there are others in charge of dealing with that. My job covers what's outside the building. My job is to make sure that doesn't descend into chaos. Stop breaking the rules and I'll stop bothering you. I don't trust you, Tibbs stated. Iridian shrugged. That's your problem. I'm going to enforce the rule on you like I do anyone else. Tibbs snorted. I'm not seeing you enforce them on the noble. On the nobles? Tibbs sensed the weave in the goblet react to the added pressure as the Iridian tightened his hand on it. It wasn't adding ice to make it harder, but how the weave changed kept the fragile-looking item from shattering. What you're seeing is the guild keeping me from enforcing the rules on them. Sometimes the guild lets people who have no business having it keep the power other grants them. Commander, Don greeted as he joined them. Sorcerer. The Iridian replied coolly, but nowhere near as brusque as when he addressed Tibbs, enjoying being paraded for her benefit. One's position comes with requirement. I have no problem accomplishing the one to keep the other. Iridian drained his goblet. You're going to fit in here perfectly. He put it down hard enough. Tibbs sensed the weave react. Then he walked away. He seems to like you, Tibbs commented. I'm not sure he likes anyone. Don watched the commander speak with the guards. But I'm not making his life difficult. I'm not making his life difficult, Tibbs replied. He's making mine difficult. Don smiled. Perspective can be interesting like that. Tibbs watched the crowd. Tirania spoke with a man wearing too many jewels. Tibbs could so many jewels that could buy all the armors and weapons in the kingdoms with them. Well, the town at least. Is this about more than what it looks like? Is Tirania just looking to get more people to do runs? She's looking to get them to invest here, as well as have them convince others to invest. Help Craggle Rock grow. The town, well, a city, is as much as what draws people to a dungeon as the dungeon itself. The two usually grow side by side. The dungeon provides more opportunities, so the city grows, and with more people arriving, a proportionally larger number of them will brave the dungeon, helping it grow. He took a goblet without looking and sipped it. We've had setbacks that disrupted the pattern, and she's looking to set that right. Why? She has expectations to meet. I expect she's in charge, so she's held accountable for what happens here, for how things happen, and what happens if she can't meet those expectations. I'm not sure. The sorcerer glanced at Tibbs before looking at the crowd, sipping his goblet. Within an academy setting, she'd be brought before a board of inquiry to determine how much of what happened is her fault. Too much, and she'd be replaced. Tibbs watched Tirania tried to determine if there was any desperation in how she spoke to the woman with a strand of silver woven in her black hair. What's a board of inquiry? It's a group of people who have the authority to decide the fate of those under them. Wasn't Marger the only one above Tirania? Where do they judge someone? Don chuckled. I have no idea where Tirania would be judged. He thought it over. Well, I suspect that they'd need to look over the result of her decisions first, so the final judgment could take place here, since they'd already be here. Tibbs nodded. So Tirania needed the town to grow, and these people were how she planned on making it happen. If that failed, Marger would notice, wouldn't he? That would draw him here. Then what he needed was to get information. Think we should talk with these people, Tibbs said, taking a goblet. See what they're looking for in a place to send people to. He smiled at Dawn. We do want to make Tirania's job easier, after all. He downed the content and grimaced as it burned his throat. When he was able to breathe again, Don's suspicious expression was gone, and they stepped into the crowd. Time after time, Tibbs was dismissed, talked down to, or simply ignored as he... Okay, if I... Okay, time after time... Okay, all right, okay. Time after time, as Tibbs was dismissed, talked down to, or simply ignored, he had to fill the cracks. He had to fill cracks in the ice. Okay, that works. Just so many commas. The nobles hadn't held on to the impression Tibbs was important. Most realized how Tirania used him and Dawn, and from the pieces of conversation he overheard, he had the impression many only humored her. Some treated Tibbs better, as the nobles' perceived place within the hierarchy dropped, the dismissals became with apologies. The talking to didn't quite have as much of a downward angle to it, and he wasn't ignored. They were who looked at what Tirania was offering as a way to advance themselves. They weren't all ignorant of the show she put on, but they seemed tolerant of it. Then there were the few merchants among them. They swallowed everything she told them so completely that if Tibbs couldn't sense the absence of essence on Tirania's bright words, he'd think she was using magic on them. They saw a new market to increase their wealth and through that their position within their city. Some saw Craggle Rock as the city of their future, where they could start a mercantile empire from. The merchant talked with Tibbs, but kept their distances. They weren't worried about the information they gave him, but that he might pick their pockets. Merchant could spot thieves and rogues at a distance, and few of them trusted either to keep their hands to themselves. When, much to Tibbs's surprise, the meal was called, he realized he was ravenous. After that, there was more being ignored, more conversation he listened to, and a few he engaged in. And when he noticed some of the attendees leaving, he did the same. But not before John grabbed him so they could bid their host a good night, as was proper. Then they were escorted to the exit, and Tibbs couldn't wait to reach his bed. He didn't reach his bed. Jekyll met them halfway to the rooming house, and Don continued on by himself. The fighter led Tibbs to the warehouse, and Tibbs looked on the empty space, filling the forming cracks over and over as heat tried to bubble out from where it was buried. This was only a setback, he reminded himself. Let Irdian think he'd struck a deadly blow by taking all Tibbs had hidden here. Tibbs would be in a position to rebuild much sooner than the commander knew. Irdian was too set on his work to completely drop his guard, but if he thought Tibbs had to start from nothing, his focus would shift to more important things for a while. Wait. Nothing but things for... Okay. Why does it feel like thing showed up way too often? For a while. And if Tibbs could avoid attracting the attention back, that time could stretch. He'd have to be careful in how he procured new equipment. Find a better place to store it, but he would have coin. He'd be able to exercise some of the power they gave him and make what he needed happen. The sorceress sat opposite Don, with Tibbs on his left and Duran on his right, reading the papers. Tibbs hadn't understood why there were 7 sheets when all 7 pages. You know what? He's always been... Papers and pages is basically what he's been using. When all this was about selling the pool, but it was why Darren had dealt with it. This is your work, merchant? She asked, a smile forming. Surely this isn't... Let's not do things that way, Dawn said imperiously as she wove essence within the words. I did say we both knew how this would go. Did you believe I meant I would fold under your promises? The smile he gave her reminded Tibbs of his own while channeling corruption, but Don acted that way without suffusing himself. Her smile didn't falter, but the essence pulled back into her. I suppose it's a sign you belong to at the academy that you planned this so well. She took a quill out of a pocket. It had essence woven through it, water, earth, metal, and others Tibbs couldn't identify. He was surprised there was no corruption. She placed the tip over a line. You understand I can't agree to this. She struck out the words, a neat black line in the wake of where the quill passed. Of course, Darren replied joyfully. I did never presume a sorcerer of your caliber would simply agree to the first offer given, or that I wouldn't seek counsel, Dawn added, not quite managing to look down at her, on her. I will admit that despite what I saw of our previous interaction, I had hope there wouldn't be quite as much of what we look for in a prospect in you. Dawn's smile turned genuine. You can ask most who know me in Craggle Rock. I'm not known for pleasing others. She scratched another line, this time writing something over it. I had hoped this would be quick. Where's the fun in that? Darren replied, grinning. Tibbs groaned as the merchant motioned Crowsat for tankards. He'd expected this to be done already. Just how long were they going to be at this? Darren, Anuja, and Dawn were at it most of the day. As the server brought food, Tibbs considered leaving the table, but worry she'd use essence to make things go against what Darren was arranging kept him there. Dawn would sense if she used corruption, but as a sorcerer, she could pull on other elements, and Dawn might not be aware she was taking control of the negotiation. Tibbs wasn't sure what he'd do if she tried, but at least he'd have the option to do something. So he remained, listening to them argue and write changes on the pages. He expected that eventually the words wouldn't be legible anymore. There would be so much ink there. He groaned when the two argued over what a word meant, getting an amused look from Dawn. Tibbs knew words changed meaning from one language to the other, but they were using magic to be understood this time. Darren had paid for it because he didn't want any misunderstanding. How could words not mean the same thing when magic was used? They agreed on something Tibbs hadn't kept track of, and more writing on the page had happened. By the time the sorceress stood with a copy of the page she'd used magic to make, and Darren had gone over to ensure no changes had been made that way, the shadows were long. She left, smiling. Don had a sim- Don had a similar smile as he read the papers, and Darren pulled another thinner stack. He wrote in a few places, showed it to Don, who read it, then signed it. Darren added his, then passed that to Tibbs. The number Darren had written was longer than Tibbs had expected, and those weren't copper. That's more than I asked for. A lot more. With this, he knew he could buy arms and armor from the entire kingdom. That's the beauty of a good deal, Darren replied, then took a bite of the fragrant slab of meat he just brought to their table. Khrushchev had brought Tibbs a simpler dish, even if he hadn't asked for food. Everyone comes out of it with more than they wanted. Don carefully rolled the papers and put them in a small leather tube which he strapped to his belt. I got everything I wanted, and they agreed to pay me during my apprenticeship. But all she gets is the pool, Tibbs said. How is that more than she wanted? Darren smiled. Don't let how she acted fool you, Tibbs. She came into this expecting to pay much more than what she did. But she was hoping Don wouldn't get help. Tibbs had experience with haggling, but the loser always ended up with less than they wanted. That was why someone haggled. She could have used essence to get what she wanted from you. She would have been disappointed. Darren said, I took precautions against that. That is what negotiations are, Tibbs. We hope for an easy victory, but plan for an expensive battle. Much like war, Don said, cutting into his meat. But unlike them, it's possible to walk away with everyone involved pleased with the result. Dawn gets a more comfortable position, you more money, and she didn't have to spend as much getting what she wanted. Doesn't that mean we should have asked for more coins then? You could have done that, Darren replied, but what would you gain with more coins at the expense of her displeasure? Angering a sorcerer was never a good idea. Even every story bards sang made that clear. I still don't get how everyone can end up with more than they wanted. He ate what was on his plate. The food was blander than what Russell usually prepared, but Tibbs didn't mind. It's why merchant like Darren's are around, Don said as he ate a few bites. Thank you. When Tibbs mentioned you, I didn't expect such a skilled negotiator. That's quite all right. I don't make much of that aspect of my trade, and I expect Tibbs mentioned me because of our history, of our history, helping each other, more than the knowledge of what I'm skilled at. If you couldn't have helped, Tibbs said, you would have told me who could. They ate in silence, and Don looked up. Darren, am I really so disliked by the merchants? You are abrasive. Well, you've been so. I watched you interact with the others many times. You might not be wrong that you are entitled to what you ask for, that you never seek to underpay, but that isn't what matters. Darren sipped his goblet. It's the attitude. Tibbs is entitled to anything he pays out of my shop or any other, but he doesn't enter into the transaction with that belief. He understands it's an exchange and that, like the negotiations here, it can be done while respecting the other participant. To be clear, I have, he smiled, swindled Tibbs here and there, and in return, he has spun me stories regarding some of the items I bought from him. But when one caught the other, we accepted it as part of how it goes. But I never tried to get more than what I sold was worth, Darren said, annoyed, or demand to pay less than an item is worth. How fair the money is, it doesn't matter when it's demanded of the merchant, Darren said. So I should just lie about what I bring? Let them swindle me? Darren shrugged. That depends on the merchant you deal with. He smiled. But you could start by allowing them to negotiate. He paused, the fork nearly to his mouth. You might find you enjoy it. And that concludes chapter 24 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read This story, as well as the other in the series, they are up on Royal Road for free. And if you're looking to support me, you can read ahead on my Patreon. It's about 20 chapters or so. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the note. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.